Okay, everyone, we might get started in the interest of timekeeping. We're going to kick off our third panel for the day. Thanks everyone who's been with us since 9 a.m. this morning. It's great to have your continued attention throughout the day. Before we go any further, I'd like to acknowledge the land where we're gathering on today. We're on Dja Dja Wurrung land, beautiful Jarrah country. Sovereignty was never ceded. We're here on stolen country. I'd like to pay my respects to Jarrah elders, past, present and emerging, and I'd like to extend that respect to the First Nations people who are with us today. My name's Amelia Wallen. I'm the curatorial lead here at La Trobe Art Institute. Today, I'm joined by some exceptional panellists, and we're going to be talking about one of my favourite topics of conversation, which is making space for artists, self-organising activity, seeing gaps and filling them with initiatives led by artists, generally for artists. And this is a topic that's come up several times in our conversations already today. Themes of community, themes of friendship, themes of self-organising and self-organised activity keep coming up, and that's no accident. The kind of initiatives that our panellists are going to be talking about today really are core to the arts ecosystem. They're core to emerging artists, but they're also right through artistic practice. They continue to offer systems of nourishment and sustainability to practice. So I'm going to introduce all our panellists just briefly, and then I'm going to invite them to introduce themselves in whatever shape or form that might take. But with us today, we have Josephine Mead, who is a visual artist, a writer and a curator. She was a founding artistic director of Milk Gallery and is currently community coordinator at Blindside Gallery in Melbourne, Naarm. Next, we have Sophia Tsai, who is sitting in the middle. Sophia is a curator and a writer based in Naarm, Melbourne. She's the current artistic director of Bus Projects, one of Australia's longest-running artist-run organisations, while maintaining an independent practice and a writing practice at the same time. Next to Sophia, I have Janet Bromley, who probably needs no introduction in Bendigo, but Janet is an artist and she's the City of Bendigo's First Nations Arts Officer. And Janet played an integral role in establishing Dja Djawama, a dedicated and permanent First Nations gallery on Dja Dja Wurrung country. Huge undertaking. Can't wait to delve into how you pulled it off and how it's going. By way of beginning, Josephine, I might throw to you. You've got the mic ready. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are now, your kind of practice more broadly, and what self-organising means to you?
So echoing your acknowledgement, it's a pleasure to be here on Dja Dja Wurrung country today, land that has such a long history of creative making and positive collaborative initiative. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm an artist and writer and a curator. So my practice started and is ongoing in terms of making my own work. But in the last decade, it's extended into more community-based outreach and arts worker roles, mainly at the Artist Run initiative level, which is a part of the sector and of our arts ecology that I feel very, very passionate about. So it's happened in a few guises. I volunteered in lots of art spaces straight out of art school, and then the three that I'll talk about today are Blindside Gallery. So I've worked there in the past as a gallery assistant and also as chair of artistic directors for a couple of years. But I've recently returned there for a new role of community coordinator. I also run co-publishing, a collaborative publishing platform, and established and ran Milk Gallery for its 1 year of programming in 2022. So quite different spaces in terms of funding and structure, all spaces that have had to run with very low funding at times. But would you like me to do my presentation now, Amelia, or just introduce first? Okay, I'll let the next person.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you all. I'm Sophia Tsai. So yeah, I guess today I'm here representing Bus. So Bus Projects is an artist-run organisation that has had many iterations and many homes. And at the moment, our current home is in Brunswick East on Little Miller Street. So Bus Projects is part of a broader ecosystem of artists basically self-organising to create opportunities to exhibit, collaborate and professionalise as well through exhibitions and programs and so forth. And one of the things that really attracted me to working with BUS and being part of that organisation is it really feels like at this grassroots level is a space where you can make change, where you can address gaps in the sector, or be really in close communication with the artists who you are serving in your community and what their needs are. Of course, there's the issue of being underfunded, but on the flip side, I do think there's a kind of responsiveness that can happen in these spaces that may be more difficult to achieve in a kind of more established but yeah, as an independent practitioner, I work as a writer and a curator, and actually as a curator, my practice has always been shaped by the relationships I have with artists and forging kind of connections between artists as well. So independently, I've also worked with a lot of different artist-run spaces as well, and I think I think that's sort of the context from which I'm speaking from today.
Thank you. We're going to hear more about BUS Project in a moment, but thanks for that wonderful introduction. Janet, tell us about how you got to where you are now.
First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on Jara country, and also acknowledge that there's been huge sorry business you would have heard of, but also other sorry business within our communities, which have been sort of a constant lately. So I'd like to acknowledge the ancestors, emerging leaders, and just acknowledge that. So I'm Janet Bromley. I am the First Nations Arts Officer for the City of Bendigo. I came to Bendigo about 12 years ago, I think. I'd been made redundant from being a manager in a community managed mental health service. Couldn't get a job anywhere, had a hip replacement, so I was an old woman, a broken old woman, so couldn't get a job anywhere at all. People keep telling me to retire. It would be lovely to retire. You're not allowed to say that in an employment service. That's interesting, the sneaky way they all went around saying, you should stop, woman, but I couldn't. So anyway, I applied for La Trobe Uni to do a Bachelor of Creative Arts. I stayed through that, did honours and came out with a Masters. And then applied for the job at the City of Bendigo. If COVID hadn't come along, I'd be in Queensland now. MIUT, I wouldn't be here. So during the experience of being at university and being an older person, you can take on a role if you choose to be a support person for other people, and I guess I collected quite a few young people along the way, and I connected up with my First Nations community and the people who were running the community-supported Nalderong art exhibition every year. Were exhausted. It's hard work to work in community art, and when you're doing exhibitions, it's really hard work. Don't ever underestimate how hard that is for people to do. So I took over, I moved us into Dudley House, and I guess what I came with from working in a mental health service was to know that there's funding out there for stuff. You just have to look under all the rocks to find it. And from that, I think we've got, on my books now, I've got about 40 First Nations artists who are feet on the ground in the Bendigo region. And we didn't have that many when I started. So they're not always in exhibitions, but they always know that they can be. So now part of my role was to connect with the community, see what community wanted, as opposed to the council giving them what they thought they needed, and to set up a group of people who talk with me about my role, so that I'm not the only person who's deciding what's happening within this Aboriginal community in regard to art and the council, and also talking to the council about what First Nations people, but I also drop in every now and then what other artists want as well, because I see that somebody needs to start doing that. For I've got some ideas if anybody wants to take it on.
I think that's going to be one of the themes that we see emerging in our conversation today is collectivity and not doing things on your own. That I see through all of your really different practices, that collaboration, collective ways of working, making space, not just for yourself but for others, is really paramount in the ways that you work. Next, I want to get into the kind of mechanics of your spaces and practices. And I know Josephine's got some slides. We're going to try the switch if that works. Do one? Oh, yeah.
Ah, thank you. Will it just come on?
I think if you just press this one, we might just get it working. Oh, we'll just see how, yeah. No? Oh, yes, there we go. Okay. Top one. Lovely. Thanks,
Cool.
Ben.
Thanks, Amelia. So I'll start with Milk. So we established Milk on Wurundjeri country on Johnson Street in Collingwood in 2022. There was 4 of us who started it, myself, Kurt Miedenbach, Isaac Christie and Brodie Kikinos. We just happened upon a cheap space coming out of COVID. They were struggling to get people renting spaces, so we got a good deal and had it for a year. But we got the keys and opened a month later, so it was very much a quick endeavour and very responsive, as you noted before. Often artist-run initiatives have to be very responsive. So we had a really ambitious year full of programming. We had about 8 exhibitions, cinema nights, residencies, curated readings lists, curated listening lists, public programs, and to do that so quickly, I very much drew on my networks that I had sort of fostered in previous years through my own creative practice. So we took on different roles. Different roles to make it happen, and that was a really important thing at the beginning, was to define who was sort of best placed to do what. So Isaac was really amazing with install, as was Kurt, and gallery maintenance, and all those physical things needed to actually make the gallery a gallery and sustain that and assist with artist installs. I was placed well to curate, and Brodie was placed well to do media and promotion. However, after a few months, she got other commitments, so left. So it ended up being the 3 of us. But yeah, I curated a lot of the program. Each of us artistic directors curated an exhibition. All of the other exhibitions were invited. Our main thing we wanted to do with Milk was just to give space to artists for free. We didn't have any funding, we didn't have a lot of resources, but we had the space, so we really wanted to fill our program. So one way we did that was, in between the exhibitions, we developed a really short, rapid residency program where artists or collectives could come in and just have the space for 4 days in between an exhibition, do whatever they wanted, and we asked them to do some sort of public program as a result. So that was really how we curated our public programming. And we ended up having workshops, screenings, performances, talks, really a wide variety of public programming. And we also, for those residencies, we actually invited partner organisations to curate them. So Centre for Projection Art curated one, Chambermaid curated another, and by partnering, that allowed us to actually bring in networks that were wider than our own networks from the 4 of us. So it was very interesting with Milk because because we had so many really different practices, our networks were very different. So each exhibition and then each residency, we'd kind of get a new audience, which was great. So this was the exhibition that I curated, An Ear to the Edge of Sound. That actually came out of an online City of Melbourne exhibition that I did with Tina Stefanu, Grace Ferguson, Julian Tuna, A.M. Kangaisa, Lucretia Quintanilla and Katie Stackhouse. And then we turned it into a physical show for Milk. And the reason that I mention that is because I think with a lot of self-organising initiatives, it's important to let projects feed into one another and have life beyond an exhibition or beyond a talk, or really to constantly be asking, how can we extend this conversation we've just started? What can we do next? And that's how a lot of this sort of fast full programming was possible. It was from fostering conversations that had happened previously. So up in the top left, that's a performance by Katie Stackhouse as part of that. More public performances with musicians. Sorry, just look at where I'm up to. So in terms of how we sustained the year, it was pretty challenging, and we quickly realised that 4 people who became 3 wasn't enough. So we brought on volunteers that helped with openings in the bar. We also could see gaps where we needed additional help. So running the residency programs and the care involved in settling the artists into the space was one thing that we were finding hard to maintain. So we developed 2 special volunteer roles as artist support coordinators that were just focused on supporting those residency artists. We also had a good friend, Seb Caney, do documentation photography for free. And that was an important thing, not just to make an archive of the space, but also to be able to offer free documentation for the artists as well, because while we could offer them free space, we couldn't offer them artist fees. So we were constantly thinking, what extra help can we give them? Let's make sure there's someone there to help with install. Let's give them free documentation, do as much promotion as we can, stuff like that. So then I'm going to move to my next role at Blindside. And for those who don't know, Blindside is a Melbourne-based artist-run initiative. We've been going for 20 years, started in 2004, and we're in the Nicholas Building. So we have quite a long-standing history, and as a result of that, we have quite a strong governance structure, which has really been shaped and changed and challenged over the years. So we have a board who manage the logistics of the space. We have another board of artistic directors who take on curatorial responsibilities, and then we have staff. So for the last 10 years or so, Martina Copley, who's amazing, was our main staff member. She was gallery coordinator, and she'd have a one-day gallery assistant to support her. She stepped down this year. She's still an artistic director, but we decided to split her role into a gallery coordinator role and a community coordinator role. So I'm the community coordinator, and doing that meant that all of the logistics of running the gallery could be done by the gallery coordinator, and then my role could really focus on community. So that means working on partnerships. So we partner with a lot of organisations such as Liquid Architecture or Arts Project Australia, and that's a big way we broaden our networks. And then also managing intern programs. So Blindside focuses a lot on education and also intern professional development. We're a learning space, so it's good now that we have a little bit more capacity to really focus on fostering those situations. So for Blindside, for funding, we rely on grant funding, often through City of Melbourne. We have been successful in Creative Victoria in the past, but haven't been able to sustain that of late. And we also rely heavily on a once-a-year fundraiser where artists donate work, and we also do a second fundraiser where we commission a few artists to make new works that are then sold as artist editions. So some examples on the left. I'll just, before I move on, say that over that 20 years we've been able to support 2,000 artists, so it's a pretty huge output. And then my last one is co-collaborative publishing, which I established with Christine McFetridge in 2020 during lockdown. And we really just wanted to create a platform where we could share local arts and literary practices and really share diverse practices as well. We were successful in getting a bit of City of Yarra funding, which has meant that we have been able to do 4 online editions and also 1 printed edition. So when we did our printed edition, which was titled Water in 2021, we accompanied it with public programs where we did readings. And it was one of the first arts public programs in Melbourne just when the lockdown finished, and a lot of people came, and it was a really beautiful community night where things felt possible again. And in last year when we got our funding, we received less than we thought we would, and we thought about what we could do, and we thought about making another printed edition, which would have been wonderful, but takes a lot of time and funds go pretty quickly. And we thought back to that public program and wondered if we could actually do more and reach more people with programming for the year. So we did a few online editions, but then we also did a working groups for arts workers at 7th Gallery, where we brought arts workers together for a day of talking about what care means in the arts, in hopes that those conversations could go back to the respective organisations that people were working for, and foster a bit of change and spark ideas. And then we also had a 1-day symposium on care at Composite in Collingwood Yards, where we brought artists together and again considered how care can function through artistic exchange. So I think that's a good example of self-organising in terms of how sometimes it's important to actually shift what you're doing to see how best you're sort of benefiting your community of artists and the general public. And yeah, I think I'll send over to you.
Well, I might just respond quickly, just to say, no, that was, I'm gonna have more questions later, but just thank you. That was a very generous overview of a really dynamic practice. It's very networked. I think that's really key, where partnerships, relationships, friendships, conversation are driving the activity, and that there is this idea that practice can be iterative and you can continue to work with artists in different forms, in different ways. And Janet, this makes me think of what you said as well about kind of bringing artists along with you in a mentorship capacity. You know, these aren't relationships that just need to flare and burn out. These can be long-term sustainable relationships. Thank you. That was really wonderful. Sophia, if you're happy to go into the mechanisms of BUS, I will load up the BUS website for us to look at.
Yeah, of course. Josephine, that was amazing. You are someone who is so, I think I said this to you earlier, you're so generous with how you work with other people, and that really shows in all that you shared today.
You do.
Yeah, so, and I feel really self-conscious because I have no slides. So going after Josephine, I feel... However, I would like to direct you all to the BUS Project's website, because I feel like all the info, that's okay.
But I think also not having slides is a result of being a very busy arts worker, because we were talking at the lunch break about how pulled in many directions these roles are. So I think it's important to note that as well. It's part of it.
Thank you. But maybe should I just get going? Yeah. Yeah. That's okay. It's just because I thought something visual would be helpful. I guess the easiest way to find out about BUS is just to Google us, join our newsletter. I promise we don't spam you. Or follow us on social media. So yeah, BUS Projects, it's really interesting for me working at what I would call a legacy artist run space. Like Blindside, we've been around for a long time. This is our 23rd year. And when I say legacy, I mean legacy both in like the length of time that it has existed, but also the kind of artists that we've worked with. Josephine and I were just talking earlier about how it's, with the way that these sort of spaces work, while we support emerging artists or artists at a kind of experimental stage in their practice, we do have this sort of legacy of artists who are now very established, who have come through our doors. So what I found really interesting about BUS is the way that iterations of this organisation has shifted and changed. So it was founded sort of as a kind of sound-based space back in 2001, and it was in the city. And then it moved to another home in Collingwood and kind of became about all art forms. The previous directors, Shannon Goodwin, I think also played a huge part in shaping the artistic program and so forth, and the artists that came through the doors. And now that I'm there, one of the challenges that I'm thinking about is, I guess, honouring our legacy audience and the kind of history of this place, but also thinking about what direction we want to move in and what we want to do. Hearing Josephine talk really candidly about what it's like to operate a space, there is so much labour and care that everybody who works in these spaces give to these spaces. And it's an interesting time because I feel like you kind of have to make a decision about whether you want to further professionalise, whether you want your Artist Run space to become a small to medium-sized arts organisation, or you want to retain its roots. And I've been having conversations with my board and also with our funding bodies, and we're all in agreement, actually, that what we don't want for BUS in the next 4 years is growth. And that sounds, when you say it out loud, it sounds kind of counterintuitive. It sounds like, but under capitalism, everything must always go up. But I think it's really recognising that there is an importance in just maintaining something or sustaining something. And I jokingly say that we're in the deprofessional era of BUS projects, where we don't want to get to a stage where we are, where our doors aren't open to everyone anymore, I guess. So that is sort of the challenge. The day-to-day running, we are incorporated. I had to Google what that meant from your email because I didn't even... We have a board, and then we have 2 paid staff members. Many years ago, as with other REs, the model that these spaces operated under was that artists would pay to exhibit. So when I was a curator and curated a show at Blindside in 2017, I think, me and all the artists that I work with split the cost of the gallery hire. And this is a very conventional way that Artist Run spaces previously existed. However, with the rise of rent prices and so forth, it's much harder now, I think, to kind of do that. But also, we are talking a lot more candidly about the ethics of that, like asking artists to, pay to exhibit. It brings up a lot of ethical questions, and it also is a barrier of access as well. But in order to not do that, then these spaces need to rely on other sources of funding, which is itself another can of worms. So it's about navigating these 2 things, I guess. But BUS, going forward, our priority is to make sure that we are a space that's free for artists to exhibit in, and that we can support and pay staff for their time. But yeah, as I mentioned, this kind of brings in additional challenges with funding, which I think Thea can speak to in the next panel. I guess what I'm trying to get at is these spaces are really important, and they exist because they really address the needs of our sector, but there is so much unrecognised labour and care that goes into them. So I'm really passionate about advocating for artists, to have a living wage, or, these spaces to kind of get recognised and have that equal level of support. And I think part of that is also recognising that we, as organisations, should not be kind of working competitively with each other, but actually should be partnering together a lot, which is what you see happen a lot with these spaces. So before my time, BUS Projects, Westspace and Liquid Architecture did a collaboration called Disorganising, where with the funding from that, they really wanted to... Oh, you were working on it, Amelia. You can speak to that.
Yeah. Well, I was a prior director of Westspace, and at the time during lockdown, or just at the beginning of lockdown, Westspace, BUS Projects and Liquid Architecture were all unsuccessful in bids for major ongoing financial support. It's quite triggering to talk about. I'm sorry. My colleague as I say this. Well, just, it was this moment of great uncertainty, and this is something that anyone involved in a non-profit encounters is, the grant cycles, and that meaning to continue operating, to scale back or to close. And that Bus also had a moment where closure was imminent. So these spaces are entirely precarious. Even West Space, which is now over 30 years old, it still toes this line of precarity. But the Disorganising project was around this thinking that if 3 organisations applied for funding together, well, they can't reject all of us. They're not going to defund all of us. We're actually stronger together. So we put in an application and were successful as kind of this 3-way unit for this, kind of recovery period, and we got to employ staff for that time, and it enabled a lot, but it also drew criticism from ourselves as those participating in the project, because we were aware that this is sort of what capitalism or neoliberalism wants. They do want this amalgamation of spaces and just think, oh, actually, if there's just 2 of you, that's fine, we'll just fund 2 of you really well and everyone else can just do it for free. So I think this kind of healthy balance between, being able to deprofessionalise when it's required and to know that actually sort of self-organised activity is really important.
Yeah, I mean, so I joined Bus at an extremely precarious position. When I joined Bus, they had just announced, I think 3 months before they employed me, that they were about to close because they did not get this funding that was essential to keeping our doors open, paying rent. And then because they didn't get that funding, they then got sort of, I guess, like a quick response sort of funding to help them close down. But instead of doing that, that funding was then put towards keeping it afloat. So when I came in, very honestly, when I came into the job, I was like, well, there's nowhere lower that we can go as an organisation. This is the time to try things that are different as well. Yeah. So it was both incredibly anxiety-inducing, but also very freeing, I think, as well. And but yeah, that's why I think the way that we work now as a team is very aware of that. And we want to make sure that as an organisation, we really think about what it means to have a future. And not using the word growth and not using these terms, but not necessarily as a negative thing. It's just to really acknowledge that actually what we do really well is what we should maintain, which is having a direct kind of working relationship with artists. And and kind of looking at what our capacity for that is as well. And Bus, is in a kind of, I'm very happy to share that we have 4-year funding, which will commence from next year. So we have at least, a stable future for 4 years, which to us is like, wow, that's, artist-run spaces run on very kind of short calendars. Major organizations might be programming 2 or 3 years in advance. Artist-run spaces will be programming months in advance. So to us, 4 years, is a lifeline. And it's a very exciting time to kind of have that. But it's also a time to really think about, like I said, the rent conditions from 2024 are very different to the rent conditions of 2001. So however artist-run spaces were founded back in that time is not necessarily the reality that we have now today. So yeah, but it's not all bad. It's very good and exciting. Yeah. The partnerships and the collaborations are the most generative and I think valuable part of my role as well.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much. And I think what's emerged just from these 2, presentations first, and I can't wait to hear from Janet, but there's, the balance between the legacy artist-run initiatives, and I haven't heard that phrasing before, and I really love it because it is this kind of custodianship of a space that's been going for decades that needs to be carried forth. Blindside, West Space, Bus projects, but then something like Milk Gallery that doesn't aspire to kind of decades of operation, that actually does a huge volume in a short time with the resources that are at hand. That's also a really exciting model that I think some people in the audience might take away from. Janet, your project is a point of difference, but there's more stability, I imagine, but getting it off the ground, I'm sure, was a real feat. Could you talk us through the mechanisms, and I'll pull some images up?
When I came to Bendigo all those years ago, I started asking why we didn't have a First Nations gallery in Bendigo. That's how long it's taken, because our gallery space is only 2 years old. I guess from my point of view, being at uni and having that time meant that I could, I'm just an interferer in people's lives, so I'd see something I thought an artist should do, and it's none of my business, but I'd go and tell them they should do it. So, you know, why aren't you doing this? How come you're not doing that? Why don't they go to openings? What's the matter with you? Free cheese and wine. That was my call at university. Why aren't you there? But just seeing, I guess from my previous experiences, that there was lots of opportunities for people that people weren't taking up, and it's a fear factor. And the very first thing is rejection. You know, people don't do things. And I think you guys saying, let's stop now and just be here, how we are, that's the most amazing thing. I've never heard anybody else say that, and I think it's a really good idea. Breathe, establish yourself, and then see where you go from. That's excellent. So anyway, back to me. I went to university, I got my master's, and in the last couple of years of university, Bendigo had their creative strategy. I was an older person, so I bullied my way into all the meetings. I went to all sorts of, I was on all sorts of panels. I had all sorts of discussions through that strategy period. So the First Nations voice was really strong because it was coming from me, but the thing that surprised me was there were so many other people saying exactly the same thing. So the strategy ended up with a very strong future action that was to have a First Nations arts officer and a gallery space. The gallery space got there, so I started work, and the gallery space could have happened within 6 months. It didn't, because we didn't have a space. We just had the thoughts in my head what it could be. Bendigo Art Gallery was in the post office gallery down at the visitors centre. They decommissioned that when they realised, when they thought they were going to get a lot more funding, and they left and we moved in then. And I think the reality is that that strategy was 5 years long and we were only 2 years into it and we were already ready to have a gallery. So the disadvantage of that is there's nothing around it except that it's a gallery space. So there's no body in the gallery space during the week to talk to people about the gallery space, because there's never been the thought that we'd have a gallery space and we needed people in there as well. All of our tech team, we're very lucky because we're part of Capital Venue and Events, so all the tech team come from people who are theatre tech people. We had to train them up to be in a gallery space because it's a completely different thing altogether. And having the Noldrong Art Exhibition every year, which is only on for 10 days a week, seems a little simplistic, but those people who were connecting to that space all through that time, a couple of things happened. Moving into Dudley House and seeing your work, everybody knows, artists know, you see your work on a gallery wall is completely different from seeing it anywhere else. And the professionalism, the way they do present their work now is a part of that, introducing people to those amazing spaces. And when we opened the gallery space 2 years ago, people in this room came and said, I've got this special thing for this gallery space now. So these up here are our second, we have one a year, which is where First Nations people can sell off the wall. Part of the process of the gallery is to also teach people how to do that, how to deal with customers, what do you do with all of that stuff. We don't have anything to do with it and we don't take any commission. The thing now they need to learn about is about commission, because they don't know what that is or how to deal with that, and that's the next coming adventure for them. I think that it's been really interesting because you can't really see how amazing this young girl, was still at high school. Is still at high school. How old is she? 16. Not when she did that, she wasn't 16. So we have from 70 to 16. These are First Nations people who are all of the people except one lives in the Bendigo region. We always have Jara people in our exhibitions. There's no Jara people in the room. If you want to have a successful art thing and you're an Aboriginal person or you're including some of those, have a Jara person, that's a good... There's strategies about how you make sure that things can be successful for other people, and that means including other people as well. These just amazing art, and just, I'm babbling now.
I'm not interrupting because I'm enjoying it. But, you know, I wanted to ask, it's so wonderful to hear working with really early career artists, often giving them their first exhibition opportunity. What role do you take in that? What's, as a mentor, as an elder, talk to me about how you work with
mainly, I think, as a mentor right at the start. Some of the young ones, a lot of the young ones call me auntie now. It's a serious thing for an Aboriginal person to take on that title, because that means you have to give a lot back. So there's a lot of nurturing, a lot of encouraging. I was talking to someone last night on the weekend on Facebook about her artwork that I thought she should be putting in for Nolderong, and she was telling me why she couldn't do that because it wasn't good enough. So it just putting my hand out. I'm now a respected person about art, Aboriginal art in Bendigo, so if I'm talking to First Nations artists, they're listening to what I've got to say. But I also know that you have to reach out, and it's not about me being an Aboriginal person, it's about being a person who's connected really well to young people. Even, I'm also an artist. The shame and the fear and the hiding and all of those, you know, words that go around to make you not hang your art on the wall, they're all in my head and they're in their head, but they haven't got to the point where they can get past that. So they need people like me, and they need people like their families and other people to talk to them about their art, to congratulate them, to, you know, one of the things that I learned at university is how to talk sometimes. It doesn't matter what your art looks like. If somebody buys it, it doesn't make any difference. And sometimes you sell the weirdest things. Sometimes somebody likes something, you think, what are you doing? Well, give me your money. I say to the kids now, just get the money. But you don't know what people will like, and you don't know what their expectations is. So you have to make those expectations for yourself. So we talk about how much do you charge for something? How do you go about having a conversation with somebody? How do you go, especially for First Nations artists, how do you go about having a conversation with somebody who wants you to make a painting but wants you to paint it in a different colour? Is that okay with you as a person or as any sort of artist? Are you okay to be doing a piece of work that is directed by somebody else? That happens a lot with First Nations people, and it's about whether you can have the headspace or how much does it cost and those things. But I think mentoring, making sure there's professional development around for people, that's been one of the things that we've done a lot. Today, Annie, who was here, she's my blood niece, Annie. So we've had 5 First Nations people, I think, it's only 5 of us. But 5, and look at how many people are in this room. If I had have done this 2 years ago, there would only be me. They would not be here because it's a place of fear. This is a university place. This is a higher end place where a lot of people think they don't belong. And because we've sustained something over a long period of time, they will come and walk along with me. And there's young people now who are walking with their grandmothers doing art, being in the same exhibition. So it's all about trust. The first thing that I established was a trust relationship, and then, and also being the person who says, no, I don't think you can do that, but you can do this. So you're the expert. They come to us. we're the experts in their eyes. And sometimes we have to say, well, actually, I don't know anything about that. But
Defer to another expert. I think this idea of professional development is really key to self-organising and artist-run spaces. And, often it's the first time an artist is experiencing, professional practice, seeing their art on the wall, dealing with sales or not, or dealing with public programs, writing a curatorial statement, engaging with an audience. There's a lot of firsts involved in exhibiting at places like the ones we've been talking about. And, Janet, thanks for that really generous explanation of how you work as a mentor. And Josephine and Sophia, I want to ask you to reflect on this idea, because I imagine you've both taken the role of mentor but also mentee. And I'm sure that there have been people who have been really fundamental to your developments and where you are now. Would anyone like to go first to respond to that?
I've had some really incredible mentors and have been really, really fortunate to have mentors that are considerably older than me throughout my whole journey, which has been wonderful. I've also had some really positive volunteer experiences, but I've also had ones that haven't been positive. I remember when I was at art school volunteering for the Melbourne Art Fair, and they just got me to sit in the toilet to make sure no one stole the soap for my whole shift, because it was Aesop soap.
I knew it would be.
But then I've really had some wonderful experiences as well, and often they've led into work. So Sophia and I actually both worked together at the Australian Tapestry Workshop prior, but my work there came out of being a volunteer. And I remember when I got that job, had I not been a volunteer, I wouldn't have had necessarily the qualifications to have got it. It was because of that prior connection. But part of my role at Blindside is really to foster the intern projects. And we were speaking about this just before the chat and saying that often, our spaces are so reliant on volunteer support, and we're indebted to our volunteers and wouldn't be possible without them. But at the same time, with those intern projects, sometimes it can actually take more work to do them properly, but it's very much worth it. But there's a big focus on ensuring that those projects, those placements are really professional development opportunities. So our interns, what they offer us really is they help with tasks around the gallery, but the main thing is that they're sitting the space, and that's what we need, is like a body in the space to care for the work and welcome people. But then we also assist them to develop a mentor project, and they can shape that in any way they want to. So some interns will develop like an online, curate an online exhibition or some sort of online presentation that we can publish through our website. Or they might be interested in helping to devise a public program to accompany an exhibition, and then we can support them to do that in collaboration with the artists. But really the focus is what do they need and want specifically. And I think that's the main thing with voluntary work, is that, there's always going to be the high potential for burnout, and I've really burnt myself out in a lot of voluntary roles. So to ensure that doesn't happen, that there needs to be like those mutual benefits. And also I think there needs to be constant conversations around capacity. Just because someone in a space has said, oh, I can do that, doesn't mean that they'll be able to, life gets in the way. So it's constantly checking in, are you still okay to do that? Or do you need help? Or do we need to bring on someone else? I think, and it's funny that when people feel they've been told that it's okay for them to say, this has gotten too much, actually then usually people can finish the job. But it's when they feel like they can't say that burnout happens, I find. Sometimes it's just having the space to say that is enough to take the pressure off.
Thank you. I want to have my final question more about burnout and how to sustain yourself, because I feel like probably everyone in this room has experienced, the precipice of burnout, if not burnout more fully, and it's sort of an endemic problem. But let's get to that in a moment. Sophia, do you want to talk about your relationship with mentorship?
Yeah, so like Josephine, in the early part of my career, I did a lot of internships, a lot of volunteering. The ones that I felt, in hindsight, really helped develop me the most were the ones that had a sort of specific focus or project, or where I did additional research and could kind of do that input. Also, I feel like the mentee thing is interesting, because I was just thinking about whether I currently have any mentors, and I think I still do. I think I still have artists in my community that I go to for advice, and maybe we don't recognize each other in that kind of formal mentor-mentee split, but it is still a relationship about helping someone grow, basically. And I guess what I'm trying to say is I think this is something that's lifelong. So I don't think you ever stop being a mentee for someone else, and even if you are a mentor for other people. I also spent a lot of time doing COVID teaching at university, which was sort of my main source of income doing those 3 to 4 years. And that experience has also really guided how I've come to BUS, because working with art students directly during that time, especially during this very challenging period of, artists were going to art school to learn to be an artist, but nothing was open. There was no way to physically present your work out into public. So there was a lot of skills that were sort of, I guess there was a gap with that kind of training as well. And so coming to BUS, I've, once again, coming back to what I said before, I've really wanted our organisation to be a space that it can still be a space for, someone to have their first exhibition. And to that, as part of the open call last year, because I anticipated we would get a lot of applications, we actually decided to kind of have different streams that you could apply in, so that you would kind of be considered within that particular cohort rather than competing with everybody else who's applied. And one of the streams that we developed together as a team was called BUS Launch. So the idea is it was for somebody who is in their first 5 years of creative practice, and this would be their first solo presentation at an Artist One space. So we haven't, like in our program, when we share what we're showing, we haven't said, oh, this is a BUS Launch artist. We haven't shared that info, but it's more about when we were making decisions about what to program, we ensured that we had that in our program. Something that one of our volunteers said to me, which I will never forget, is they said to me, it's really hard as an artist to apply for a show at an Artist One space because all my university tutors are getting the shows. And I was a university tutor at the time, and I was thinking about this a lot, and I'm like, it's true, because I guess technically we're both, we're kind of both in that same emerging/experimental art bracket, right? But the level of experience that we have to each other is very different. So I think it is sort of almost impossible to be competitive in a kind of application round when you're up against someone who has 10 years more exhibition experience than you. So rather than make that a kind of barrier, I was like, well, let's just try and separate it, or, kind of even out the playing pool a little bit, so to speak. So I think having, but that's not to say that, once you've made it as an artist, it's easy, I recognize the kind of precarity at every kind of stage or level in your practice that can happen. But I think, this is something I've been thinking about a lot in terms of what it means to be a space as an organisation that actually has a mentorship role. And it's interesting because artists coming through our door, some of them will be very happy to be completely self-sufficient, leading their own project, and others will want your input and will want your kind of feedback to shape what they're doing. So it's also about, I guess, maintaining a really adaptable approach once again, and kind of tailoring the way that you work with people to be a very one-on-one, which is what a good curator should do anyway. But yeah, one of the things is I'm a curator, but when I took on this job, I very much knew that this was not a curator job, as in I knew I wouldn't be going into this space to curate my exhibitions. I knew I would be going into this space instead to use my skills to kind of support other people to present their work. And yeah, I think that's an important distinction to make as well.
Thank you. And I think it's so great to be transparent around those different levels of application that's available, that there is BUS Launch, but that it doesn't need to be framed as such in the exhibition. But at the application stage, you can self-identify where you apply. And I feel like that's probably really great information for the people in the room today. And before we get to my question about burnout and sustainability. Josephine and Sophia, I probably goes without saying, but it's worth emphasising that both Blindside and Bus are open call and would be open to regional artists. There's no limitation to say you have to be Melbourne-based by any stretch. Probably you would welcome applications from regional artists. Anything that you would say to regional artists who might be interested in applying to those streams?
Definitely apply. And I think, so we've tried to streamline the application process. So last year, we didn't even ask for a CV, which I think was quite challenging for some people because they were like, emailed us and said, oh, where do I put my CV? I'm like, we don't need a CV. We just want you to tell us about yourself, about your work, and give us some images. You know, you really, I think, as practitioners, the thing that will speak most to your work is your work, right? And I think it's also about how well you understand your own work and what you're trying to do, and how you can kind of communicate that. If your strong suit is in writing, can you express that through really strong support images or documentation? As long as you can be as clear as possible. I think that's always the feedback I give people. You don't need to write an amazing essay about all the ideas in your work. You just need to be able to communicate what it is that you think you're doing and what is interesting about it to someone else who knows nothing about your work. So yeah, I guess I would definitely encourage everyone in this room, if they're interested, to apply for our open call and really have a think about, what is it that you want to do with us.
And Blindside also would love regional applicants. And yeah, we really loved how Bus has opened up that application process. And I've had a lot of conversations with people about how great that is to have that higher level of accessibility. And I think echoing what Sophia said with, if you're not a strong writer or if for whatever reason an application is challenging, I think particularly at the Artist Run Initiative level, people actually want to be helpful. So it can be worth, calling or emailing the gallery and being like, I'm struggling with my application, can I just have a bit of a chat? Doesn't mean that you'll be, guaranteed an in, but it might mean that you just get a few insights to make the application a little bit stronger. But yeah, definitely we want applications. Blindside since 2019 has been able to offer artist fees. So we pay artists, we don't charge rent. And we really want a diverse program as possible in all aspects. So we welcome applications from further afield, and we're also, we've been partnering with interstate organisations and are hoping to do some international partnerships in the coming years. So there's definitely no focus on people needing to be in the city.
Amazing, thank you. And I'm assuming Instagrams, websites are the best way to stay in touch with open calls. And Janet?
I'm sitting up the end here thinking I'm going to make an application for a couple of people and have a group show down your way somewhere.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, because I wanted to circle back to Noriko's point actually, and from an earlier discussion, and around this idea of having your first exhibition, Bus launch. Noriko pointed out it was easier to apply as a group than as a solo artist. So get together with some friends, put in an application.
The other thing I'd say also is when you look at how people move through the art world, it is through networking, and it is through people that you know, and it is through, for people who go to university, but also for any other people who you connect up to people and remain connected to them and tap into what they're doing. And COVID has put a big restriction on particularly people from the country, because going down there was a no-no. And so one of the things that I know for our First Nations people, but I think for lots of other artists across this area, is getting to Melbourne, because it's a completely different thing to have your work down in Melbourne than it is in this small community. There's only so much you can, so many people you can connect with in regard to your art. And doing these sort of, having these opportunities, then having you two girls up here talking like this today is a bonus for people in this room. Remember these people. That's what people do. It's networking. You go places in art with networking.
And it's right to point out those limitations that are faced by regional practitioners. They're real barriers in terms of time, money, access, then it's I really appreciate that places like Blindside and Bus see that. Networking happening right before our eyes. Before we go to audience questions, Janet, do you want to tell us, how do you sustain your practice and yourself? How do you avoid burnout?
I have some triggers, and I have some people who know me really well. Can you put that other photo up on the screen? Yes. So in my role, I'm the art person for First Nations people, but I tell you what, I'm a lot of things for the other people, and that's something that sometimes I struggle with. Rowan up there's my go-to person. He's very nice to me. He makes sure they don't break me too hard. You have to figure out yourself. You have to be aware of when you're retreating, when you're not feeling great. Days off, mental health days are excellent. These are the people I have to answer to. Here's the tourism person, the CEO, everybody under the sun, and there's Janet in the middle, and Annie Lynn. Annie Lynn's my ally. So all of those other people are people across Bendigo City Council and councillors who all have a vested interest in making sure that their First Nations art gallery is excellent, because every time you have First Nations thinks it has to be better than everybody else's. They're great with me. They think that I'm wonderful, all the rest of those things. But it's a big thing on you to have to. And it doesn't matter whether it's all of these executive people here, or a small group of artist people. The people who are putting the hard yards in to run the place take on way more than people realise, and we have to look after each other. And my sister's over there going, yeah, it's about time you left, Janet. Not yet, but yeah, you just have to...
Find your allies.
Yeah. Go out bush.
Yeah. Who'd like to respond next out of Josephine or Sophia?
I think, I agree with everything you said, and have experienced burnout, not just in gallery roles but also in my own artistic practice, and it's slowly getting better at seeing the signs and not burning out, but it's one step forward, one step back, I think, which is the case when you're working in a field that you feel so passionate about. But interestingly, my wife said to me the other day, in relation to like taking on new projects with people, or artistic, curatorial, Blindside, whatever sort of projects in the future, she said you should have your first like conversation where you're working out whatever this new thing is, and then reflect on exactly how you feel after that first conversation, and if you feel like a second one might leave you feeling uplifted or overwhelmed, and sort of use that as an assessment of whether to move forward. Not to say that that overwhelm can't be the sign of something good to come, but to really like listen to your gut with first impressions. And I think that's a really good lesson for me, because I get excited and want to jump in straight away, but it's sort of taking a bit of time at the beginning to go, how sustainable is this project going to be? And if it is going to be overly challenging, who do I need to bring in so there's additional support? And if that support isn't there, maybe it's not the right time, but it's very hard.
That's really good advice. I'm also going to be borrowing that, thanks to your wife. Sophia.
So I think we all have a bit of a parasocial relationship with art, with artists, and with art organisations. By parasocial, I mean we put a lot of energy and time into things that may not be reciprocated. And the reason I'm saying this is I feel like it's easy to romanticize the kind of creative labour that all of us do in this room, and to kind of keep on pushing ourselves to do that because we personally find the value in that work. However, one of my friends gave me really good advice once, which sounds really cynical, but actually I think is coming from a place of deep love, which is the art world is not going to give you what you want. So really, I think what that's kind of saying to me is that you need to have things in your life that bring you joy. Your family, your friends, your hobbies, I have so many special interests that are not art related, but then they kind of become my projects. Anyway, I'm not very good at boundaries. But I think for me, like, it's just as simple as going home at the end of the night and switching off and having my partner and my dogs there with me, who are all non-art people or art, entities. And yeah, also just being really aware that at the end of the day, there's so much more value to me as a person than just the work that I do. And that's so much easier said than done, because I know all of us operate within this kind of weird structure where, our work is very personally connected to us, so the value is like in that. But yeah, I really do think just having that really strong boundary and recognizing that, because there might be periods of time when either your practice or your day job or whatever will be very challenging, and just trying to remember that that's not you as a person. And yeah, all of us have value beyond the things that we do or the things that we make. So that's been something that I've been telling myself a lot, to try and remind myself, and also at an organizational level, thinking about that as bus projects, as, like what I was saying earlier, that we don't have to keep growing to be important. We still have a role, and we're still valued, beyond that. But yeah, I think it's sometimes it's a bit hard for people to talk about this very candidly, because we have to put on this professional front. But I think actually what I'm saying is coming really from a place of care and love. Yeah.
So appreciate your candor. Thank you so much. I think it's a good moment to open up to some audience questions, if anyone has one. Yeah.
Gallery is.
It's down in the Visitors Centre in Pall Mall. Over the road from the Shamrock Hotel.
Of the information centre?
Yep.
Yep.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Hi, I've been here hoping to get a lot from me as an artist, but actually my question is about me as an educator. So I'm in arts education. I've been teaching the arts for 20 years now. And one question to probably yourselves on the panel, but anyone else who's still left in the auditorium. One thing you wish you had have received through your education to do with the arts?
So I'm not an artist, and I studied art history. And in my 4 years of study, including my honours, I never met any artists. We were just studying this sort of like concept of art, like up here. And it wasn't until I started working with artists and really being involved at that kind of level that I learnt anything. Oh, no, that's not true. I mean, I could write a pretty good essay before that. But I mean, I learnt really about what it means to work as a curator and to work with other people. So yeah, I think sometimes people ask me, is it worth going to uni to do this degree? I'm like, it really depends on what you want to get out of it. I feel like actually the most important thing is to work out what you're interested in, find the people that are also interested in that, and working together. So yeah, I think that's what I would have told my younger self, to like get out of the kind of ivory tower of academia much earlier. Yeah.
I think I finished my degree in 2014 and honours in 2017, fine art degree, so I haven't studied any sort of curatorial or cultural management courses. In my both undergrad and honours, the biggest thing missing was in our art history in terms of First Nations representation. There was pretty much none. It was scarce. In terms of practical skills, I loved my studies, and conceptually, technically, in terms of making work, they were wonderful. I had beautiful lecturers, great cohorts, but in terms of practical skills for writing grants, for all of that stuff, all the admin, like I often say to people, I feel like with my arts practice, sometimes it's 80% admin, really, and that was definitely what was missing. And they're the sort of things that often don't come to artists naturally, so we do need to be taught them. And I've learnt from, again, going back to sort of mentors and people being generous with sharing. I had a lot of friends who were older than me when I was younger who had been successful in securing grants, and they gave me their grant applications so I could learn from them. And I think that's really important to when you do get some success then to share those tips, because they're not necessarily taught at art school, but they might be more so now, I'm not sure.
I have two things to say. There was a boy in grade 4 and the teacher put my work up on the wall and he criticised my work very loudly, and I can still hear his voice. And I would say to myself, don't listen to that stuff, what are you doing? But the other thing is also I went to university when I was 60, sorry, no, that's not right. Because I came up here and I couldn't get a job, I applied to university. I was 60 when I started. So you can have education anytime you like if you really just push yourself forward. They sent me a letter. No, they didn't. They actually rang me up and said I was going, and it was like the 23rd of December. And they said, we'll send you an email. But of course, they didn't send me an email for weeks and weeks after that. But I thought, oh, it doesn't matter because they said I can go, so I'm going. So that opportunity is open to you forever, and don't listen to what other people say.
Was a bit kind of interested or sort of like excited, I suppose, about Sophia, when you said that you really wanted to work at a grassroots organisation because it's a place where change can happen. And I just wondered if you could kind of, I don't know if you had some examples of the changes that you'd seen, because it also seemed then when you were speaking about sustaining your own kind of well-being, and you were talking about how the art world won't feed you, you know, yes, so something's feeding you, so yeah.
Yeah, we live in these contradictions. I have to live in that nuanced position between recognising that we live in a system that undervalues art and artists, and it's really rough, but also that I believe ultimately this is the most important thing, you know. So yeah, I am an idealist. I am very idealistic. I think that is why I work in an artist one space. In terms of the change that I'm talking to, so in my experience working there in a small team with a board, any idea that we have had, we have been able to implement. And that is not something I've ever had in another job. So for example, bus launch, we implemented that. We wanted to change how many programs we had, we can implement that. Also recently, a number of artist-run spaces, not just bus, but a number all around Australia, together collectively signed a ceasefire statement calling for an end to genocide in Palestine. And that was something that we could do response as a kind of change. And we could do that kind of more quickly than I think, you know, our major state institutions can, because they just have so many more red tape and things to get around. But we were coming to it from the perspective of supporting artists in our community who are directly affected and were facing censorship. So I guess just my experience working for BUS and thinking about kind of other projects that have been artist-led in the sense of like my independent work and so forth, it's always been, what's most rewarding is being able to have an idea and see whether you can follow through with it. And that's why I keep on doing this kind of work, I think. So yeah, the change, you know, may not be, I mean, I don't think that, yeah, I kind of operate between like the kind of cynicism and idealism. Like I don't really know whether an art exhibition will ever change the world, but I do think it is a very important space where we can hold space for all of those things. And that's why we got to keep fighting for it. So that's how I kind of feel about it.
Nothing to add.
Oh, okay.
Have you ever found that your scope has been limited by the fact that you're relying on government funding? Like that's put a cap on the creativity, the whatever, subject matter?
Yeah, I mean, the money's got to come from somewhere. So it's either government funding, philanthropy, which I don't know if the Blind Side has any, but we don't really have.
Just in the past year, we've been lucky to have one philanthropist, but it is amazing. Prior to that, it's been funding, and I think in terms of the Disorganising project, at around the time that those three organisations lost funding, a few months later, Blindside lost their Creative Victoria funding that they'd had for quite a few years, and that essentially cut our budget in half. So, you know, while there is, you know, you lose funding and you have to redevelop things and sometimes can make, you know, new possibilities happen. There also are situations where you just have to go, well, we can't do that now. You know, we wanted to do that next year. We might need to do it in 3 years' time if we can get funding. Yeah, it's just it's a tricky balance of going, you know, how can we, because there can be, like, you know, we had no funding at Milk, and that was very stressful at times, but as like you've pointed out, it means you can be so responsive, and it was, you know, it did mean that we could really, like, we kind of had nothing to lose in a way. So yeah, as everyone sort of mentioned, it's just such a balance, and it also depends, you know, who's on the board at the time, what conditions are around you. All those things affect what is actually possible in terms of being responsive to those losses as well. So it's really like a bit of a, you know, case-by-case scenario in terms of what you can do.
Is censorship, like, do they tell you what you can and can't? Oh, no, you can't do that with this money. Like, sorry.
When you apply for funding, you usually have to submit a budget for what exactly you're doing. So you need to be quite precise usually, or if you're not precise, at least there's a structure for what you're going through. So I guess it's not censorship as much as I think accountability to what you're asking for. In my experience, that we haven't had any pushback because we've been clear that we're doing the program. We're in charge of our program. We select the artists in our program, but this is the general shape of the program. But to answer your question about also the government funding thing, one really interesting thing about working at Artist Run Spaces and working through, we also, like every other space, we have annual fundraisers. And the fundraisers every year remind me that the biggest supporters of our spaces are artists themselves. Artists not only give work, but they also buy work. So we actually, as an ecosystem, we are mostly supporting each other. And that is a really beautiful thing, I think, but also I think can be perhaps unsustainable. So when I'm thinking about big picture thinking, like what do I want to do in my life, big picture, I think what I really want to do is shape public discourse around the value of art, so that if art is valued more broadly by a non-arts audience, maybe that can also shift a little bit about the level of support that it receives. So I was really excited that I recently joined the NAVA board, and one of the reasons I really wanted to work with that board is because they do such amazing work with advocacy, especially around artist fees and things like that, and really at that kind of like, so yeah, I think you kind of have to, yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is, as much as like it's really incredible that, you know, artists are the ones supporting other artists, we kind of need to go a little bit outside of that close loop as well, because we need to change the narrative about the value of art more broadly, because I think as a culture, Australia doesn't really hold much high regard for visual art. Yeah.
Was there a final question? I see a hand. No. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty of funding in our next session. It's going to take a slightly different format. Rather than a panel presentation, you're going to have the chance to meet with representatives from 3 different funding bodies and ask questions to them directly. We're going to be moving over the road to Engine House for the next session, but we've got a few minutes to bathroom break, have a chat, say hi, and we'll be over there at 3 for our final session. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.